Koinos is all about putting as much control in the hands of smart contract developers and users as possible. The modular upgradability makes us users of Koinos because we're now building contracts using the same paradigms and design patterns that dApp developers will use. And so essentially we're trying to figure out how do we give them all the flexibility they need with simple enough interfaces that it's not overwhelming. When we talked about smart contract upgradability and saying, well, every contract can upgrade, but a contract can also define the authority structure for that particular address. That also applies to users because from the blockchain's perspective, there's no difference between a user address and a contract address. They're just addresses. We envision the Koinos mainnet as having users uploading smart contracts themselves to define their own authority structures on what permissions exist for what other contracts. Now, from a user perspective, we never want end users to be writing smart contracts and having to upload them, but we could create, or anybody could create, management smart contracts, as well as external tooling that uploads this smart contract on behalf of the user, ties it in with some sort of management contract, and then presents a nice, easy interface on how they can set their permissions. And the benefit is this is all being defined in smart contracts. None of it is specific to the Koinos to one particular Koinos fork. The Koinos mainnet might not even look like this in 5 years. Maybe this is how we think it should work, and we build all this infrastructure up and people start to adopt it, and then someone comes up with something entirely different and it works way better and users migrate to that. That's 100% a possibility and supported out of the box in the way Koinos is designed. And so the cool thing there then is users will be able to define whatever sort of permissions they want. Hopefully dApp developers are coming up with interesting and useful smart contracts to manage those permissions in ways that are meaningful and useful to their users, but it can very easily take a step beyond what's being done on chain. And those same contracts that are defining permissions for a smart contract could define an arbitrary set of permissions for things that are used off chain. I would expect dApp developers would make use of this just for their own authentication of, well, I want the user to be doing this thing on my contract, but then I want the same authentication on my the centralized portion of the dApp. And so it would then be leveraging the same infrastructure that exists on Koinos. And from there, it's not that big of a leap to assume that someone may use Koinos specifically for authentication and nothing else. Now we're using it as a form of a decentralized permission store, which is effectively a public key infrastructure. I don't know if for sure this will be a killer use case of Koinos, but one of the things it could fulfill is having a decentralized permission store and allowing users to manage permissions for apps across the internet that may or may not have a decentralized component, but may simply see a benefit to having a decentralized authority structure. Google OAuth, it's everywhere. And a lot of people, as soon as they have to create an account for a new service and it says sign in with Google, they're clicking that button because it's easier, and Google has provided an easy control panel where you can pop up and see all of the apps that have signed in with Google OAuth, and you can just start clicking no on them. So it's nice because it's easier to sign in and has provided a centralized location in which to manage those permissions, but is being managed still by a centralized company. So Koinos could be a replacement for that, where it's now managing permissions for all these different applications, none of which are actually storing any information on Koinos. They're just authenticating with Koinos. And users, by managing the permissions on Koinos, can have a one place where they can manage all their permissions for all their accounts, But now those permissions are managed in a decentralized manner rather than via a centralized company.